All right, so I'm Azucena Ortiz. I'm here with Jorge Rivera. We are the founders and directors of Healing and Justice Center. We also have Carla, who's in the audience, who will be supporting with any questions that might come up in the chat, with any tech support that we might need. She's our communications manager. And we have Catherine, our project coordinator and manager, and who wears also many hats, is going to also be in the audience managing the chat and supporting us with that. So we are really excited to be here on this, like Jorge mentioned, our very first live. It's the first out of 3 live streams we're going to do. It's part of our end of the year fundraising campaign that we have going, and we wanted to do the first one on Giving Tuesday. This, I think it's a national event in which we have the opportunity to decide what projects are close to our hearts and or are doing the work that we believe in, and we get to support, contribute, and donate to those. And so we are hoping, those who believe in our work can support us and in doing this work. And so the goal today is to share a little bit about why healing, tell you a little bit about us. But before that, we'll do a little bit of grounding so that one, I could stop talking so fast. But two, it's the end of the day, right? It's 6 p.m. A lot of us have had a lot going on. So wanting to just bring us to the present moment, check in with our bodies, with our nervous system. And then we will invite Tessa Hicks Peterson, one of the editors of Practicing Liberation, and also a professor at Pitzer, where I, got my BA at. I got to sit with her there and learn from her. So it's exciting to kind of have her join us in this space. What else? So we'll have her share a little more about why healing, why practicing liberation, what that means, what the book's about. And we have some questions for her, and then we'll open it up for everyone else for some Q&A. Yeah. Anything else, Jorge, you would want to add in regards to that?
No, that's great. Really excited about the content and the live stream and Tessa and having this conversation. So it's a much needed conversation. It's what we're all about. And so really excited to be doing this with y'all.
Yeah. And if at any point you feel called to donate or become a monthly supporter or contribute, volunteer, you can go ahead and donate at healingandjusticecenter.org. You can see it at the bottom of this screen. It's healingandjusticecenter.org/DT2024. You can email me. We can, grab coffee and talk about different ways that you can get involved as well. All right. So let's go ahead and do some grounding. I wanted to go ahead and do a little bit of breath work. And I've been practicing these 5 breaths of reset by psychologist Colombia, Psicólogo Duran. And he invites us to do these 5 different breaths to help us reset our nervous system. And so it's really helpful for me, especially when I've had a stressful day. And so let's go ahead and do that together. I will name the 5 breaths first so that you all know what we're gonna be doing, and then we'll do them together. So the first breath is a yawn, just a yawn. The second breath is a deep inhale, hard exhale. Right? If you can get some sound and some in there, even better. Third one is just a soft sigh. Okay. Fourth one is a deep inhale, count to 6. Long, soft, slow exhale, count to 8. And the 5th breath is just a full body inhale, opening up our arms, if you can, your legs, and just sort of opening up your full body. And then exhale, bringing your arms in over your heart. Okay. So let's go ahead and do those together. Let's start by just a good yawn. Second, deep Inhale, hard, exhale. Third one, soft sigh. Inhale, count to 6. Exhale, count to 8. Last one, full body, inhaling as you open up your arms. Exhale, bringing hands to center. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to put on the chat how that felt for you, or a word that resonates how you're doing today.
Yes, please use the chat to just express how that was, what the experience was like. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Which parts? And we'd love to hear from you as far as that. Now we do grounding work, and we do these sort of exercises on a daily, because it's a practice, and also because we're trying to rewire our brains so that when we do have really big feeling type of moments, or a lot of stress or anxiety, that it is a tool that we can get into our toolbox, pick up from our toolbox, and be able to use to be able to regulate ourselves emotionally. So the practice is a daily thing. It's an everyday thing. It's all day thing, so that we can just rewire our brains and be ready for those stressful moments.
What I love about these practices is that often we can sit and do them for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever we have time for, but we can also do them in 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, and use what's at our disposal, right? Our body and our breath. Yeah. All right. So our topic for the day is why healing, right? Like that's what we promoted, why healing. So I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about what healing means here at AGC when we're referring to it, right? So healing for us is a holistic practice and process that prioritizes the restoration of emotional, physical, and psychological well-being for individuals and communities. It involves creating safe, supportive environments where people can process trauma, rebuild trust, and regain a sense of empowerment, right? And healing in this context is acknowledging the systemic inequities and emphasizing the importance of addressing root causes of harm, right? Such as social injustice, racism, discrimination, oppression. And it's both a personal and a collective journey, right? That allows us to grow and heal from harm, right? Anyway, it moves us beyond the individual well-being to foster relational and systemic repair. The last thing I want to say about that is, well, two things. One, that in this healing practice, we acknowledge that trauma disproportionately affects marginalized communities, right? The burden of trauma is on marginalized communities. And the work is to create equitable access to resources, care, and support, right? Oftentimes, those who are most affected don't have access to healing spaces, right? And we also reframe justice not as just punishment or punishment, but as restoration and liberation, right? Challenging systems that perpetuate harm. In essence, we're saying healing is a revolutionary act, right? In healing, we recognize that we're whole, and by coming into awareness, it's this fight against inequities and oppression. That's what I'm going to say about that. Jorge, do you want to add anything to that?
Excuse me. Yeah, sure. All of that, it was fantastic, Azucena, and I think it really encapsulates what we're trying to do at the Healing and Justice Center. I think you and I both recognized a while back that there needs to be an intersection. There needs to be a commingling of healing with the social justice work that we do, because I, like, as an organizer, I saw a lot of burnout. I saw a lot of conflict. I saw a lot of just the way we work with communities, and ourselves are burning out, communities are burning out, and it just seems that we're not taking care of ourselves. And I think healing goes more, like, it goes beyond self-care, right? It's not just about, having a glass of wine and just relaxing at the end of the day. I think that it needs to be something that we're incorporating in our work, in community, with each other on a constant, and not some extra activity that we have to do after an 8, 10, 12-hour workday working in community and in social justice work, right? It needs to be integrated and embedded in it for us to be able to collectively heal and take care of one another, right? Yeah.
And so it was so perfect to, when I went back to school and I was working with Tessa Hicks Peterson as a student, and she is also an amazing advocate of healing practices in social justice work, and I'll share a little bit more about her, but we wanted to bring her in as a speaker to talk about that. And so we're really excited to introduce Tessa Hicks Peterson, and I am gonna read her bio and then let her tell you more about herself. So here it goes. So Tessa Hicks Peterson is a dynamic scholar, activist, educator, and community builder with over 25 years of experience in civil rights, social justice, and higher education. Raised in a vibrant community of activists and artists in Venice Beach, Tessa brings a unique blend of passion, scholarship, and creativity to her work. As Assistant Vice President of Community Engagement and Associate Professor of Urban Studies at Pitzer College, she leads initiatives in community campus partnerships, transformative movement organizing, and healing justice. With a PhD in cultural studies and expertise in anti-bias education, decolonization, and social change, Tessa's work bridges education, art, and activism. An accomplished professor, dancer, and mother, she is dedicated to fostering healing, empowerment, and justice in all her endeavors. Join us for this inspiring conversation with Tessa. And she was also my professor, as I said, in Pitzer as part of the CASA program. And I'm so excited to have her here with us.
Yes. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you so much, Jorge and Azucena. It means the world to me to be accompanying you on this beautiful journey as you continue to build your gorgeous center and deepen this work in so many ways. I'm so inspired and impressed and honored to be a part of it in some small way.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Tessa. Do you want to share a little bit more about yourself outside of your bio? I know that one thing that's not clear in your bio is that you are one of the editors of Practicing Liberation, and there's a workbook that goes along with that. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about yourself and then tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, thank you. So I always start with, who I am is in gratitude to who the people are who brought me into this world, my parents and my grandparents and my ancestors. And being born and raised in Los Angeles on Tongva land and Venice Beach in the 1970s, I had a deep education around social justice and art and activism through my family. And so part of who I am is really connected to the charge that I am born with through coming from a family, a long line of activists. My grandparents were blacklisted because of their activist work. My parents were on the FBI list for their activist work. There's a long lineage. So I take that really seriously. but I also come from settlers. My great grandfather was a homesteader in the desert out here in Southern California. And so I have these lineages, both of people who've been persecuted and people who have persecuted, and settled on land that wasn't ours. And I take that also really seriously about like, what does reparations look like through healing and justice work here and now? So, I think that's a part of who I am and why I do the work I do. I never planned to be in academia. I always worked in local social justice organizations all through high school and all through my 20s. And then I got into teaching, and I did fall in love with being in the classroom and teaching, but also working in collaboration with local organizations. So the work I've done has always been in collaboration with local social justice organizations. And so the program that Azucena referred to, CASA, is stands for Critical Action and Social Advocacy. And we do direct partnerships with a lot of different organizations working on carceral justice and immigrant justice and education justice and all kinds of different issues. And through that work with these organizations over time, over just, decades of having done this work since I was 15, starting with the National Conference for Community and Justice, and to today where I'm 48, I have many years of doing this work. And I have seen, just like Jorge was mentioning, like so much burnout and pain and organizations imploding. And it's hard work. I'm part of that too, that challenge, right? Individually and collectively, of staying with work that is so triggering and so painful, and that we all bring our own selves to it, all of our own wounds and our biases and our privileges and disadvantages and all the things come into the room with us. So the work is challenging, not only systemically what we're fighting against, but personally, all the stuff that we're negotiating. And I saw that coming up again and again and again with the organizations that we work with. And people seem to be wanting more tools for how to navigate and not burn out and not implode as an organization and not take the systemic violence and reproduce it in our own ways in our own lives. So I brought my best friend and longtime collaborator, Hala Corey, and she's a trauma therapist and a yoga teacher, and she does a lot of somatic embodiment work on healing, also in social justice activist work. And she did a workshop called The Traumas of Injustice for the staff of the main 8 organizations that we work with. And just a feeler, like, do people understand how traumas related to injustice impact our work, our lives, ourselves, and are they wanting more knowledge and skills and practices to navigate that? And the overwhelming response was yes. This is crazy out here. We're trying to do our best, and we want to know more. And we want more support of how to deal with it individually and collectively as organizations. So that was the impetus for the book that we created, and we created it really based on that charge from communities being like, we want more tools, more practices, more knowledge about what is trauma, how does it infiltrate into the work that we're doing for injustice, how can we build resilience and knowledge and all kinds of different ways in which to heal ourselves in the process of working for justice, and then how do we engage that in the work itself in our organizations. So the book really starts with the research that Azucena also was a part of with a number of students and community partners, where we just did interviews and focus groups and healing circles and discussions with people about, like, what is the stress that you feel in the work? What is the trauma? How does it come out in your own self, in your own body, and in the day-to-day way of the organizations you're working with, or the school or the institution you're part of? And what do you draw on already to navigate this? Because most people have tremendous assets and resilience that they've, for generations that have allowed them to survive. So people have tools, of course, already. This is not an invention. And people have been doing this work, forever. Black queer feminists, activists in the 70s were talking about healing injustice. This has been something that has been a part of movements. Civil rights movement, crossing the Selma Bridge, people singing "This Little Light of Mine," that those acts of singing and imbuing our bodies and our voices and our collective with spirit and love and power through art and song and chanting and movement, that's that's our birthright. So movements have always had this, and how it's uplifted or seen as like, oh, that's cute and nice, but too warm and fuzzy, or when it's really like respected, that ebbs and flows, right? And different cultures and organizations. But we found that a lot of people really wanted more around this. And so, yeah, that's where we created an anthology. Yay, I'll show it again, even though you already showed it on the screen.
You put it in front of you so that it doesn't, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then we had a variety of different practitioners that we've worked with over the years, who are scholars and activists and organizers and healers and teachers who wrote various different chapters on different angles of this topic. And that's what the chapters are. And then there's an accompanying workbook that really gives into like actual activities you can do by yourself, with your family, with your community, with your organization, with your staff, to integrate some things in the day-to-day work and life, to really practice liberation on the fractal level, as Adrienne Maree Brown talks about, right? We practice in ourselves and our own bodies, and how we talk to ourselves, how we think, how we engage our own mind, body, and spirit, how we do that with our partners, our families, our children, the earth, and then how we do it with our neighbors, our communities, our organizations, and eventually, changing the systems itself, which is an end goal, of course, of all the work.
It's beautiful. I love it. Love it.
Love it. I think that you kind of answered the question, like when we think about the word healing and how people understand healing, how does that play a role in social justice work?
So I think this is a really interesting question. I think we have to recognize, again, healing and social justice work has always been a part of it, right? And so to integrate it further is just another resistance to colonization and capitalism. Capitalism's like, we got to work, we got to go hard, we got to produce, and your value is based on what you produce. That's part of the capitalist equation.
Yeah.
And when we become sort of machines for how we produce, how much we produce, how quickly, how fast, how successful we are in that way, it diminishes the worth that we have just based on being human and having love and joy and those things that are harder to practice and imagine. So part of the healing work is to really push back on the impacts of colonization and capitalism, to say our worth is more than just what we produce. And we are going to make sure that our wholeness is recognized and uplifted in the work, no matter what the work is, right? That we can't be disposed of in mind, body, or spirit. The work of injustice is to break us apart from our wholeness and our interconnectedness. So the work of healing is to bring back to life what is already there. We're already interconnected. My breathing out is you breathing in, like our cells and our bodies and we're already deeply interconnected with the earth and each other. It's just about us like taking a time in this busy modern life to pull back and to recognize that and to uplift it, and then to feed it, right? To feed that interconnection internally, mind, body, and spirit, and with each other. And the reason it has to happen in social justice work is, if we come into this work frazzled, jaded, in pain, angry, all of those things are real and valid. But if we don't know how to navigate it, it can hijack the work. And then we reproduce that productive capitalist thing, and we're pushing each other and we're like, got to get shit done. And then we're not actually realizing, like, oh my gosh, we're just perpetrating that urgency and that really dehumanization that happens at a systemic level, because that's what we've been fed. That's the Kool-Aid. So of course, there's no way, even if you're the most woke person and kind person on earth, you're still gonna replay it. And especially those of us like myself who are white, or if you grew up with any privilege of money or other kind of power, that's been indoctrinated you. So to undo that takes tremendous work and consciousness, which is part of the healing work. So the healing can look like just being aware of your biases, being aware of the trauma you bring in, being aware of how we reproduce violence. But the healing also can't happen fully always in the work. So I want to talk about this point too, which is that if you're working in an organization or school or some other thing that's working towards social justice, that end goal for community liberation is the real end goal, which includes you. But if you come in and like, I'm going to use this as a space to work out all my wounds, it can come out sideways and mess things up because you're still working on your own individual stuff. So you're carrying in all your baggage and you're like, oh, this is great. It's the healing place for me to heal it all. It's like, we also have to put the community at the forefront and the work that we're here to serve and do. And that means that we actually can't center our own selves all the time. It's a tricky balance. We have to center ourselves, our well-being, and the community at the same time, but we can't use the community work for our own benefit in a way, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, we have to be
interesting. I always refer that as part of the healing is having awareness where it's appropriate for us to share what's coming up for us, what wounds, and when to know, be like, ooh, this thing's coming up for me. This is not the place for me to work on that need or that healing, right? And having like an awareness of what's happening for you so that you are centering yourself while also not centering yourself, you know, like if that makes sense, to know when it's appropriate to share, right? To have those feelings. And I think I love that you're talking about the different ways in which healing happens, because we often think that working through our wounds and bringing up our wounds up front and forward is healing. But in reality, to me, healing is having awareness that that's alive for us and being able to move through it in community. So I love that you're
yes.
Yeah.
And that discernment is tricky, right? Because also when something feels alive, you know, it's like a little kid, they have a big emotion. They're like, oof, it's all there. It's hard to like know how to like, but as adults, we're actually supposed to be responsible to be like, let me discern, is this staff meeting the right place for me to go through this thing? Not when we have an agenda of 20 things that we actually really need to do in our commitments to community.
Yeah.
Can I turn towards a friend, a partner, my elders, ceremony, therapy as a place to work that through so that I can return back to the work and have some resiliency to be like, it's still alive in me. I'm still negotiating. I'm here like all of you, all of us, but I'm also committed to practicing that liberation of my body and myself every day so I can show up here to this space and we can practice together also without like expecting each other to do the therapeutic work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, I find in social justice circles, advocacy circles, organizers, that some folks that come into these spaces with harm or trauma, they utilize sort of like the liberation type of platform to have a voice, to have a presence, because that's the need that they're trying to meet. And
it feels good.
Yeah, and in so doing, they harm.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, no, it's like, no one's going to shut me up. I'm going to speak up because, you know, no one's, you know, I have the right to say, and yeah, they do have the right to speak and to have voice and to have agency. And in so doing, they share and they can also harm those folks around us. And so healing, when I think about healing and collective healing, it's a complicated, multifaceted, multi-leveled, multi-tool type of thing, because we can't just, like you said, throw up all over somebody and expect them to receive it welcomingly. We have to be conscious of our own stuff and how that's playing a role in community and in relationship with others. And I'm just reminded of hearing you talk about all this, a couple of sort of like, I don't know if you call them cliches or slogans, but it's like, be the change that you want to see in the world. Like, so there's work that we need to do on us so that it reflects in the work that we do. And the other one is, you can't pour from an empty cup. Yeah. Right. So if you're constantly just giving and giving and giving, you know, at some point you're not going to have enough to give.
Yes.
And so there's some giving that has to come this way.
Absolutely. And, there's another quote. I think it might be originally from Aristotle, but I heard it from Kazuhata, who has this beautiful book, Healing Resistance. And he talks about the quote, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. So if you have no training in doing that deep inner work, you might come in and like, I'm going to be great and I'm going to do this and all that. But you have to have you can't pull the axe out of the tool shed and expect it to be sharp if you haven't been sharpening it every day, right? So we have a responsibility, if we want to show up and do social justice work, to every day before we get to the fight, we're out there, we're sharpening the tools, and that's, so when you say, what does healing look like in the work? For me, I got to do a morning practice, so I can show up in a good way to people, unless I'm going to come out sideways, tired, grumpy, out of spoons, something. And that's on me to know, right? So for me, a lot of times it's yoga, it's being in nature, hiking in the woods, it's qigong, something. I'm like a very movement person. So I got to feel like in my body, like I got to tap, I got to bring it in, I got to dance to get in my spirit and my body in a grounded way. And then that's when the discernment helps. Like, ooh, there's some stuff alive for me. I better be mindful of that. And where's the right place to knock it out? Is it coming out? I'm going to come out partially on my kids, when they mess something up and then my reaction is too big, that's warranted for the moment, and come out my colleagues. So there's the practicing of that healing work in ourselves. That's really important. And then we can show up to our organization, say, how can we make this a place that maybe isn't a healing space? Like, it's not meant to, if you're like working for housing discrimination, or you're working on helping folks with documentation, paperwork, or whatever, like the work is that you're doing for community change, it can be a nurturing place without being like, this is the location to come and get healed, right? But we can still make it a nurturing space. We can do that with staff meetings that start with a check-in. Like, really, how are you showing up today? So we all know, and we can be a little more tender as we're working together, right? Knowing where you're coming from. We can do that by bringing in some embodiment. Start a staff meeting with 10 minutes of some sort of practice. Like Asusana, that was a beautiful breath practice, right? It took us all of 2 minutes, and it just changes, right? The biochemistry, everything changes when you bring that in. But it can also be sharing food together. It could be just making playlists and dancing, right? Having a workspace that feels nurturing so that I can show up with my culture, my spirit, my body, and feel seen and whole in that space. So that can be a realm of healing without turning the workspace into a therapy space.
Yeah.
I love it, because I think that's where, like, you're naming sort of, there is an individual practice that we need to do that is part of the healing, that it's getting to know myself, being in tune with myself, being aware of my nervous system, knowing what my triggers are. That's my work that I need to do, what my positionality, all that stuff, I need to do that. And we do that, we can do that, and we have to find a different time. Sometimes it is within our work, right? We're learning as we go, paying attention, observing, and then doing that reflection at the end of the day or in the morning, and then doing that physical work like you're mentioning. And then collectively, we do it that by tuning into each other, being aware that we all have needs, that we're all going through this, and those practices that really make a difference within the work, the slowing down just enough to give people the opportunity to bring their whole selves, right? Their spirit, their nervous system, their body, into this space that's doing really hard work. So yes. I just appreciate that. Like, we do have a really awesome question on the chat. Let me see. Let me bring it back. You got it? Go for it.
What strategies? This is being asked by Joseph Battle 4. What strategies can be used to foster forgiveness and reconciliation while seeking justice?
What strategy? Can you? I'm so sorry. My kid's just trying to get into my house. I'm so sorry. Just give me 1 second, guys. I just have to
go for it.
Sure.
For 1 minute.
Yeah. We'll be
I
here.
love this question.
Go for it. You can give it a try while I.
Yeah. Go for it. All right. the realities of being on live on while at home. All right.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry about that.
It's all good.
I'll repeat the question one more time. It is, what strategies can be used to foster forgiveness and reconciliation while seeking justice?
Ooh, man.
That's deep. That's
That's a good
deep.
one. You know, the work of forgiveness is so powerful and so intense. And it's a real inside job, right? I can't tell you that when you have to do it or when you shouldn't do it. I can't tell you how to do it because it's a very personal thing. Each person is going to get to that process on their own, right? But what I can say is that, well, first of all, shout out to Jacoby, whose chapter in our book is all about forgiveness and accountability. And I think it's a really beautiful chapter. He's an incredible Buddhist teacher, and he spent a lot of time thinking about forgiveness and the lack of forgiveness in justice movement work. There's a lot about accountable, how we're going to hold people accountable, but a lot less about where we're going to forgive. So for me, a lot of that is like, we can get into disposability politics real quick. Someone does something wrong and they're out. And we can shame and judge and be really violent in under the guise of being about social justice, right? So I think it calls to us, like, what does it mean to also have space in our heart to recognize that we all are going to fail each other at some point, again, because we've been inculcated in these systems and we're going to replicate them. Yeah. So my white supremacy is going to come out no matter how much I try to be aware and work on it. My internalized sexism is going to come out, right? So we know we're set up to fail, right? Because we've been inculcated in the system. And when we do, what's the capacity for deep compassion and understanding while also holding people accountable? You also don't have to, just let someone off the hook, right? It's like really like holding someone accountable. There's a great quote. I think it's by Kazu Haga again, that says, what if we talk about holding someone accountable with the emphasis on holding?
Yeah.
Holding, like I hold you accountable. I'm still holding you. That doesn't mean that your violence is condoned or your racism is condoned or your injustice is condoned. But it means that I have belief that you can do better and that we can become whole again. And that if you acted in that way, something probably happened. There's some harm, there's something, or something you learned in this system that you're replicating. So can we have capacity to be willing to stay with someone and recognize maybe the capacity for wholeness for them and for us? And it might be down the line. Like I might forgive you. Jacoby says in this chapter, it might mean that I look at my homophobic uncle and say, I can't forgive you now, but maybe in a few years we'll both grow and we'll be at a place where that's possible.
Yeah,
I think it's powerful. I think when you were talking about holding, part of forgiveness for me is making sure I'm holding myself in the process and holding and giving myself space to be like, oh, that hurt and that's hard for me in this moment. And then move myself through a process of getting to the point where I recognize sort of the systemic impacts that led people to certain types of harm. And then be able to create space for, right? Like holding space for the person in that way. Because I think that like holding empathy for someone else, we can only hold the empathy for someone else if we provided self-empathy before we do, right? And so I think like, I love that. And in that process, we might have about boundaries, right? Like, this when we talk about forgiveness, there's all these areas that we'd have to like address before we even answer that question. Because I think it's for us to think about ourselves, think about our boundaries, think about our safety, emotionally, physically, spiritually. What does that mean? And then look at the bigger picture to be able to create space for the other person, right? And holding them accountability. Yeah. And
we have the agency to decide that. I'm not ready to forgive you now. I might at some point, but right now I need to just make space for myself.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'm getting towards that, but I still am feeling really tender and I need to be held in that however long I might feel that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be a while.
And I think the forgiveness piece to answer the questions, like, oh my God, what are the strategies? I think it's a complicated process as well. There's not one strategy or this, like, you use these couple of strategies and you're going to reach forgiveness and reconciliation. Like some of the work that Azucena and HJC is doing with Men Collaborative inside the prisons around Day of Healing and like victim offender dialogue, all of that can take months or years to get to a place where somebody actually feels forgiveness or willing to forgive. But I think it always goes back to where we started, is that a lot of the work needs to be done with oneself in order to get yourself to a place of forgiveness. If you're
have you forgiven yourself?
Yeah, have you forgiven yourself?
Right? No, seriously, because like if you haven't practiced that, sometimes that's the hardest person to forgive. And I just heard someone talking about that, and they were like, their therapist said to them, why are you so special that you can't be forgiven? You've forgiven all these other people and you're still not going to forgive yourself? I was like,
wow. All right. That hit a little hard. That was like, okay.
It's intense though. We can sometimes be way more forgiving with others than we will with ourselves. And we're holding ourselves to this standard. We're like, man, I forgive that person who did that, and I won't forgive myself for this. That's important to look at too in the process. So we have to also know how to have that muscle of forgiveness for ourselves if we're practicing out there, and know when it's time. I will say that in terms of like literally strategies for forgiveness, sorry to pull back to the book, but Jacoby gives this gorgeous meditation contemplative practice on forgiveness. And it's really like starting with like a neutral person who is kind of easier to forgive, and then starting with going towards like a harder person. And he also talks about in his chapter such a tender thing, going back to the issue of prison, where obviously that's a pretty big topic of conversation, that in his class, he was doing a Buddhist class inside a men's prison, and each person wrote down a suffering they had endured. And they wrote it down on a piece of paper and put it in the center of the table. And then someone else picked up the piece of paper and read it aloud. And before they did it, they did a practice for compassion. They all took a breath and said, you're about to read someone's tender suffering, like read it with care. And they took a breath and they held that person's suffering, and then they read it. And one person's suffering is, I suffered from my parents being deeply addicted and the impact that had on my life, and someone else about abuse, all these different sufferings. And at the end, someone said, you're suffering, someone in this group's suffering. The one that I read was about addiction, that how it had affected their life by someone in their family. And I am in jail because I was dealing drugs, and I didn't cause your suffering, but I did. And I am accountable to that. And Jacoby turned to the person and said, I appreciate your willingness to hold accountability, but I also want to say that we're accountable too, we as a society, because this man had moved to selling because they had no way to meet their family's needs. They could not work. And they went to selling. And who failed them in the school system, the jobs, the pushing that person to that point? And how we're all like accountable, and we all need to both forgive and maybe seek forgiveness around that, thinking about these things in more of a larger way. If you've hurt someone, but also I'm accountable to you doing that because of the ways that our system has led you to that, right? So I think it's just broadening a bit is important.
Absolutely.
I love how you're bringing this forward of how we introduced it, which is like, for us, healing is moving from the individual to the collective, right? And that's what this is. When we are talking about harm, right, we have to look at the bigger system and all the systemic oppression and harm that happened, poverty, because of racism, because of oppression. And then that people end up doing is because of harm that they're experiencing, right? And how this could be so cyclical. And how he is addressing that and knowing that as the root of harm, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you so much, Tessa, for joining us tonight, for sharing. We want to honor your time, and I know we said like a quick live, and people do live. And I think, I wanted to ask one last question to close it up with, which is just like, if you would like to share just a couple of practical steps organizers and advocates can take if they've never incorporated healing practices in their work. And you kind of mentioned them earlier already, but I wanted to circle back and just close with that. Like, what are a couple things that people that are like, wait, what? Like, for the first time, what are first two steps you would say they can take?
First, I would say don't listen to anything I say and listen to your heart. Honestly, right? So like, what in your life makes you feel that you can exhale, that you can just let down your mask and be yourself, that you can feel loved, that you can feel joy? Like when you close your eyes and maybe you try to cultivate something that brings you feeling, an embodied sense of wholeness or joy or pleasure or just even psychological safety. What is that thing, right? So then that's a pretty good leader to show you what might be the practice, right? So if you imagine it's my dog, I think of my pet and that brings me a smile because it's unconditional love. Then maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning cuddling with your dog and not rushing off to work and just thinking, oh, I got to walk the dog and feed the dog, but like getting that joy. Maybe you remember being in some beautiful, beautiful place in nature and you felt full and grounded. So maybe it's just trying to give yourself a little bit more time, concentrated. We're all so busy, but you know what? You have to walk and do things. So maybe instead of going to the store to pick up something, you walk. And even in the city streets, there's birds and there's trees, right? So I think the most accessible is like the things that you can weave into your life without a lot of too much extra, because we're also going so much that if we have all these things, oh, I should do this, I should that, then we should all over ourselves rather than like actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
So that's accessible, the thing that you already know brings you joy, and the thing that will help bring you some groundedness. So when you get to the work, you get to the job, you get to the family, you just have a little more reserve in your fuel tank. And it could really be as simple as that breathing activity that Asusana led us in, doing that. Someone told me about just counting backwards from 100 while breathing slowly. So like 100, 99, 98, 97, 96. And you kind of have to concentrate so you don't get messed up with your numbers because you're going backwards. So it makes you stop thinking and it makes your breath slow down. And counting backwards from 100 is like takes all of 2 minutes. Yeah. But I do that every morning before I open my eyes and get out of bed. And it's just a grounding presence. So literally it takes me 2 minutes. But for me, it makes me, while I'm in the bed, feel my body being held, feel my body melting a little bit and feeling focused and start the day from there. So what's accessible, what makes you feel grounded and good? If I tell you do meditation and you're like, hell no, meditation makes my brain go woo, 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 and I feel, even more chaotic, then that's not it. But dance, you can way to work, you can blast the music and sing your heart out, So yeah. I say just do the thing that's accessible and brings you joy and that you'll actually do.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you so much, Tessa. We appreciate you for joining us. I am going to share with everybody who's watching, this is our first live stream of 3 live streams that we're doing. Next week will be with Ray from Men's Collaborative, who does this work in the different prisons and with people who are survivors and have been impacted by harm, and those who are incarcerated, also survivors impacted by harm. So we're excited to have Ray next week on Tuesday at 6 p.m. And this is part of our end of the year fundraiser. So we are inviting people to donate so that we can continue doing this work in community. Next year we're so excited. We're going to be launching our iHeart parenting program that is based on Ruth Eagle-Hull's curriculum, Raising Children with Nonviolence. And it's just packaged a little bit different so that people feel a little more comfortable coming in person, you know. So you could see that on our website. And so we are fundraising for that program because it is going to be just open to anybody. All contributions welcome, no specific fees or anything. And so we are trying to get some funding to get it going. So we're really excited. We couldn't wait. We're like, you know, that book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. So true. We could not wait for funding. So we're like, we're just going to do it and have community pull us and we'll make it happen. So
I love it.
I'm excited.
Can I say something towards that end? You know, I just want to say, like, there's so much pain and suffering in the world right now, and there's so much darkness. And I think one of the ways to navigate that is to do what you can where you can. And so to know that you guys are a grassroots, local, you know, community-led organization that's doing the work, that's how we're going to fight fascism, is by building strong, healing, whole, resilient communities. And y'all are doing that on the ground every day. And what better place to put that $5 a month that could have been on coffee, you know? Yeah. Seriously. And I really think it's a really important thing for all of us to consider right now is like, how can we be accountable to just making one small sacrifice, something we maybe don't need, towards something we really do need, right? Which is healing, peace, and justice, which y'all are doing. So I'm 100% going to be the first person signing up to do a monthly donation right now, because I appreciate you guys. And that's all I want to do is support local grassroots work that's doing this on the daily. And that brings me joy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was so much gratitude. And thank you all for joining us out there on social media. We'll see you hopefully again next Tuesday. This is being recorded, so we will put the recording out there. And just appreciate you all for joining us. And we're looking forward to seeing you out in community in the coming year.
Yeah.
Everything that's happening, we really need to come together and just be there for each other and support our healing. So.
Yeah, and check out our website. There's a lot of great resources on there, healingandjusticecenter.org, and stick with us for the next couple of live streams that are coming up. The one on the 17th is just going to be us as staff really talking about what it's like, what our experience is like, trying to implement this in the office, in the work with one another, and then what we've learned over the years with that. I just want to thank again Tessa for being here with us. It was such a pleasure. Though if you haven't read the book, go get it. It's amazing. I really want to dig into the workbook next. I loved it. And like Kazuhaga had like something written in there. That book is also amazing. So if you all want to learn like skills on just like grounding, you can Google all this stuff, or you can just hit us up and ask us what we do. I think Tessa made a really great point that, you know, when one size doesn't fit all, you have to find what works for you. It can be movement, it can be meditation, it could be running, it could be like, it can be so many different things, but that's part of getting started in the process of healing, is that investigative discovery type of journey, is what are the things that work for me, right? And it may not work for everybody else. So that's sort of like the tip for today. Thank you so very much for joining us. Remember, become a monthly supporter. $5 a month, $1 a month, whatever you can do is going towards our work and bringing more healing, wellness, and resiliency practices to the community. So thanks again. Azucena, last words?
Just thank you all for joining us. Let's take a breath in together. All right.
All right. Bye, y'all. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us.